Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're talking about density done right and how do we unveil your development site yields. That is, how do you actually determine how much product we can fit on any one particular site, especially during the due diligence process when we're trying to rule out sites as quick as humanly possible. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to invite a special architect friend of mine, Emma Holmes from We Are Forma, and Emma's going to give us all of the insight, secrets, tips and tricks on how do we actually determine what our site yield is. So Emma, firstly, welcome aboard.
Hi Rob, thanks so much for having me.
That's okay. Firstly, before we go into, I guess, the show itself, why don't you tell me a little bit about your experience and that sort of thing, and why is everybody listening to you as the expert in this particular realm at this point in time? So what's your background? You've done quite a bit.
Yeah, so I'm a registered architect and interior designer. So I'm based in Melbourne, Victoria, and I have probably around about over 12 years experience in the industry. Obviously the university degree is quite long and, you go through the whole registration process, but I just love everything about this industry. I've worked in a blend of some big tier 1 firms doing large sort of tower projects and commercial and the office side of things, multi-residential, right down to some high-end studios, working on some beautiful houses, and even small projects like a lot of the subdivisions we see these days, like your dual locks and multi-development kind of sites. So a little bit of everything, and then finally into my own business as well.
That's awesome. So We Are Forma is the business. So tell us a little bit about We Are Forma and I guess how that came about.
Yeah, so the name We Are Forma is, just because everything we do in this industry is quite collective. So I wanted to sort of capture the essence of that in how I sort of named my business. But it is a relatively new business. I've just been out on my own for over a year now and seeing some really good projects come through, which is really exciting. It just kind of, you get to that point where you're like, listen, there's just a lot of things coming through and it'd be better if I just sort of took the approach and did it my way. So I just wanted to bridge some of those gaps in the industry that I could kind of see from, developer or client to architect and builder, and having a lot more open communication, stripping out some of the ego, and really just sort of looking at things in a more holistic overview so we can get some better product.
Very good. Now, you're specifically based in Melbourne and Victoria, but do you do projects all around the place, or?
East coast of Australia, yeah. So I can do Sydney and Brisbane as well. I've actually grew up in Sydney, and I lived in Brisbane for a number of years as well. I did my university degree up there, so I know all of those areas quite well.
Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is how to determine our site yield. So what we want to try and do is we've got people doing everything from really, really tiny projects to the bigger end of town. So we're going to try and cover a wide gamut for everybody there. Mm-hmm. But let's start with the very, very basics before somebody actually comes and I guess picks up the phone and gives you a call. There's some things that they should be doing themselves from a due diligence perspective, but there's also some of that ground that you cover yourself. So from a pure, initial site analysis side of things, what are some of the things that we should start to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the due diligence part of a project is extremely important in sort of checking that it stacks up. So if someone were to come to me, or again, if they're doing it by themselves, then I would say you would look at your dial before you dig information. You'll look at the land data and all of the planning overlays for that kind of particular site, whether it's got what zone it's in, if it's got any heritage overlays, some easements, get a copy of the title. There are so many things you can start looking at. You might even look at some of the property data in the area. And yeah, just basically an entire overview of anything that could realistically impact your site, right down to the physical context of that site in a particular area as well, from what is the orientation and just what are some of the precedents of projects happening around that area.
Yeah, so it's not just what's happening on your site, but as you touched on, everything that's happening around the area, because that's A, precedence, and B, it's going to give you a lot of areas actually have character that you need to comply with. So, understand what the current character is, and then understand council's intention. Are they wanting to change that character? Sometimes they're trying to transition into something new. Sometimes they go, no, we love the old. It's going to stay here forever. all of that comes out of, I guess the planning codes. In Melbourne, you guys call them the res codes, but I guess all the way around the country, they're just the development codes as they go, but different terminologies in different places. But need to understand both the zoning and you touched on the critical overlays. So each state's going to have different critical overlays, but there's flooding and bushfire and all those sorts of things. Are there any big ticket items that you guys see quite regularly that are true showstoppers?
I mean, I think res code is a big one when you're sort of starting to determine a picture of what you can fit on your site. So looking into an actual envelope study, often in 3D with the actual lines of the setbacks and things that would be required by your development is a really good place to start, because then you actually have, okay, this is the site, but these are the setbacks on each side. This is the impact of res code. And then you can get a little bit of a more informed picture. But also there by each council, there's also the schedules, which may lay out like a minimum lot size or number of stories, building height maximums. So there's quite a lot of layers to go through in that process.
Yeah, at a very high level, just so that this applies to everyone all the way around Australia, there's an order of hierarchy of all these things. So everyone seems to think that the zoning is actually the be all and end all of everything, but the zoning is the maximum potential you can get out of a site. And then there's all these constraints that sit on top of it. So there's the slope, there's the critical overlays, there's the character area of the area, there's all sorts of things like that may potentially stop that potential from ever being realised. You know, I know of several sites that are zoned for 15 odd stories, but when you look at the constraints, you get exactly zero out of it, right? So don't listen to your real estate agent, folks, because they're going to be selling you on the potential, but you've got to realise what is actually real or otherwise. Now, most of our folks out there are, I guess, novice and newbies, so they're learning the process of that due diligence. And so I know that for yourself, you provide that as a service. If somebody doesn't actually, I guess, know, or they're not confident in their own due diligence, I know that you guys provide that as a service.
Yep.
What does that look like from I guess, what's the outcome of that? You give them a formal report. How does that work?
Yeah, so it's just a reasonably comprehensive report that will go through all of that information and lay it out, like you say, kind of step by step in order, breaking down any of those bits and pieces. And then I'll also explain it, because anyone can jump onto, you know, like Land Vic or whatever and download the title or the planning overlays, but knowing how to interpret and understand the information you're actually reading in the schedules and kind of pulling out the important parts that can really impact the development is what I'll sort of summarize within that, and then even place that against someone's brief to sort of give you a real big picture overlay. And then also the envelope study being just a really quick snapshot in 3D of like, this is sort of the bubble within the realm of what you'd be able to sort of yield on this site.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk a little bit about the envelope and that sort of thing, I guess, a little bit further into the chat. But so a lot of the ground that you're covering there seems very similar to what a town planner might do, but you're coming from a very, very different perspective than a town planner might. Why, I guess, engage from an architect's perspective versus a town planner's perspective on, I guess, some of those elements there?
Yeah, so I definitely use town planners on my project, and I do really enjoy their support in sort of being able to review my concepts and, you know, doing pre-apps for planning and all of those kinds of things. But I think I don't want to crush the creative process too early. So I really like to sort of be able to visualize a concept for the site and kind of imagine how it might respond to the existing context prior to sort of getting too bogged down in all of the constraints and all of the details and things as well, because ultimately every site is different. It has its own constraints and opportunities that sort of really influence the way that you would design something. So it's having that stuff front of mind whilst you're designing, but not sort of letting it overtake and then ending up with a rectangle.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned a key piece of terminology that is unique to Victoria, so pre-app.
Okay.
So that's pre-application. So that is a meeting with council that has different names in other locations. So a pre-lodgement meeting in other jurisdictions. But that's the meeting with council to say, look, we might be trying to push our boundaries a little bit here. How supportive might council be of that? So I guess wherever you're trying to push the boundaries, I guess I would highly recommend that you engage both your architect and town planner to go, well, what's the political appetite to take this on, and then go and test that political appetite where humanly possible. But from my experience in any pre-app meeting, you'll never get a yes, but you might get a very definite maybe.
Yes, and sometimes it's not the person who's actually going to be reviewing your drawings, like that could sort of be the thought. You're like, oh, I've met, Matthew today and he's going to be the one. And it's like, sometimes that's just your pre-app council officer, and you might have an entirely different person reviewing your package of drawings. So they might say yes, and this person might say no. So
yeah.
So
always capture minutes of those meetings, folks, and understand the intent. But what you're really going to walk away with is, look, you're going to know very, very clearly if it's a very hard no. So that's and what you're looking for is that, look, we're generally in support, subject to, are you actually going to deliver what you promised you were going to deliver, and what other surprises are you going to give me?
Absolutely. And I guess that from their perspective, if you take any emotion out of it, they're just doing a checklist for compliance. And the more compliant you can kind of be, while still sort of celebrating your site and design and getting a fair outcome for your investment, the better. Because, if you're doing the right things, like not overshadowing, not overlooking, and creating something which does align with the neighborhood character, it would be fairly unlikely that they'd be able to have too much to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, we're going to start talking about, I guess, the yield analysis and that sort of thing. But as an outcome of that due diligence process, there might be a number of different permutations of product type that we might be able to get. So, for example, a site might be suitable for both subdivision and townhouse, or it might be suitable for both townhouse and apartments. So there's a terminology called highest and best use. So highest and best use is not necessarily the maximum yield out of a site, which I know that as developers, we're very, very tempted to go, well, I want the most out of this as humanly possible. What is your interpretation of highest and best use before I give everyone else mine?
I mean, I always kind of want to say less is more sometimes. Like, you don't sort of want to just be cramming in as much as possible for the sake of it. It's sort of looking at the actual appetite of what's out there, what people are wanting, and not kind of letting your idea of having 5 just be so solidified before actually taking the feedback that, like, maybe 4 that are better quality and have more amenity is a better result.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a definition of sorts that I use for highest and best use, and that is the most amount of money with the least amount of hassle in the least amount of time.
Yeah.
So you want to really understand, well, what is the product that the area is actually looking for? And whilst I might be able to get more, as you've touched on, it might cost me more to construct them, and they might sell for a lower price because they're not in as much demand. But if I create a different product, so if I'm building an apartment, we're using concrete and that sort of thing. It's a lot more expensive to actually get to. Whereas if I'm using a townhouse, it's probably lightweight construction and a lot cheaper to actually build. So when you actually start to do that, townhouse might sell for more, cheaper to build. I'm not selling as many, but by the time you do your feasibility on that, you want to understand what are all the permutations of what's possible. And then based on that, go, well, which is actually the most in demand and what's the numbers going to work out to be?
And a high quality product, would often sell faster, so you're kind of just then getting your capital back to use as equity for your next development, instead of kind of hanging on to product that's maybe not selling and then, kicking yourself for sort of creating something that's maybe not in demand.
Yeah. So let's talk about demand. How do we actually determine demand? Clearly, we should understand the demographics of the area to go, well, what are people in this area actually looking for? So what kind of demographics do you typically try to look at to understand, well, what is the kind of product that's actually needed here?
Yeah, depending on the mix of development, I guess sometimes people come to me with a very firm idea and they just want to do a dual lock townhouse, and that's what we're going to go ahead and do. But often I would definitely recommend they look at the property data for the surrounding area, whether that be the demographic, recent sale prices, what sort of product is out there that's selling, as well as physically just taking a look at what's around you as well.
Yeah, and I guess some of the things that I look for would be, I guess, the age of the people in the area. So how many are children? How many are, aged? Are there a lot of empty nesters? What does that look like? That's going to tell you, look, do I need to have a backyard? Maybe I need to have an age in place kind of design. Maybe they're teenagers and that no backyard is needed, but they might need a teenager retreat. All sorts of things like that start to go into it. Then I guess when you understand who the people are in the area, then you want to start to look at things like, well, are they owner occupier or they're investor stock? So is it more rental market? That might determine the quality of the fixtures and fittings, for example. So is this going to be something that's nice stone bench tops and that sort of thing, or is this going to be something that's going to be a little bit harder wearing and take a beating from renters coming in and out and all that sort of stuff? So then there's what is the income streams that people might be generating in the area, so we can get those stats fairly easily as well. And we can then go, well, what can people actually afford? Because whilst we might think that it's the greatest product on earth, if there's not enough people in the area that can afford that sort of budget, we may never actually get to see that price point. Now, all of those demographics, and I just happen to be sitting in the National Property Data Office, all of those demographics are available in the NPD product at a touch of a button, where you can actually go, well, when I know the site, I can actually look up all of those very, very quickly through what they use called a neighbourhood report. So I encourage everyone to actually do that. But if you don't have access to NPD, there are, I guess, paid services that people will actually go and actually do that research for you and that sort of thing. So I think in the past, especially on the bigger development sites, you've had people do that sorts of things. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. Putting together full reports and studies, anything from school and university kind of zones, and just public transport and things that are nearby, as like an entire precinct study, and then a precinct study, and then kind of using that to inform the mix. So for an apartment building, like how many 3, 2 and 1 beds? Maybe there's no 1 beds because there's just absolutely no demand for that. So all of those kind of things can really start to inform the design, so that from my perspective, I'm creating something with the correct bedroom sizes, or, is it like a European laundry or a full laundry, or is there a butler's pantry or something extra, without overcapitalizing as well?
Yeah. So it's really, and there's also things like ethnicity that might play into that, because there are, some cultures they might have multi-generation actually living in the same apartment, whereas I guess others no, I don't want mum and dad anywhere near me, stay away. So all of those sorts of things we need to factor into, well, what does that product actually look like? Then there's, well, now we know what it should look like, then there's looking at, well, what other supply might actually be sitting out there that might be competitive to us. We want to understand that supply and demand for that product, because we might not necessarily see any evidence of the product that we think is the perfect fit, but that could be 2 reasons that sit behind that. There could be no evidence of that because there's no actual supply that's ever been constructed, or it could be that there's no demand for the product, and so it's never actually been built. So we've got to understand who's actually going to use our product. After all, we're the makers of community. We're not just the evil developer that sits out there trying to profit from everything. We're trying to create a society that people want to live in the future.
That's right. Designing for, uplift in the area, creating a bit of a point of difference in your own development, whether that's for your own personal brand or for the enhanced livability of the end user, and creating more amenity, which is something council will often speak a lot into when they're kind of reviewing a set of plans. And especially from my perspective, they're asking, how did you arrive at this design? Like, why should we approve this? Like, what is it about this that really does serve the community? So it's kind of just working out all of those pieces of the puzzle and how to best integrate them into a really functional, aesthetic, great design.
Yeah, and so now we've done that. We've done our site assessment. We've done our demographic. We've got a view of what might actually be sitting out there. We want to start to validate that. Like, how do you go and validate that product might be something that's actually in demand in the area? Is that just kind of walk the streets and work it out, or how are you determining those outcomes?
I mean, I think that all of us have noticed that there's a lot of urban infill going on at the moment, particularly due to rising housing prices and things like that, and the availability of quite a lot of old housing stock around the place that are great sort of knockdown rebuilds if they're not in a state where you might want to do an extension, or again, if it's just that the site is large and you actually kind of can subdivide it and turn it into a couple of residences. So I think that's always looked upon kindly in sort of inner city areas or growth corridors, due to the fact that the amenity already exists. You know, there already is all the servicing that's required there, like it's an MBN, the sewage, the water, all of those things. So yeah, it's just kind of looking around you and seeing what there is. You'll notice in some areas they have a lot of townhouses, other areas have a lot of apartments, and that all falls into the city's master plan as well, which is why the areas and zones are broken up as they are, for either areas with incremental change or areas where they're looking for, you know, massive growth and change, where they might be allowing more stories on buildings, or actually open to the idea of apartments versus more residential area as well.
Yeah, and the council's strategic plans are always going to give you insights into that, because the council has to plan 20 and 30 years in advance with what their population is going to grow like. It's really expensive for them to do libraries and roads and, you know, sewer and stormwater and all those sorts of things that actually sit out there that they have to do to service things. So they'll be planning years and years into the future as to where they want their density to go, to make it the most cost effective for them to actually provide the infrastructure underneath, right? So that's going to give you some really good insights into what is called growth nodes and transport corridors, to go, where is this density actually likely to live? And if you're in those growth nodes, then chances are you're going to get the higher density. If you're in a transport corridor, you're going to be more likely medium density. And if you're in neither, you're in the burbs, right? So, so, you know, understanding where you're doing it is going to give you some really big, I guess, insights into, I guess, council's appetite to take on a product if you're trying to promote something very different.
Absolutely. And I mean, a development could be as small as flipping an apartment and just doing the internals, you know, so you're not kind of having to go through a whole permit process. Or it could be, you know, right down to what I look a lot more into, which is, yeah, people doing a knockdown and subdividing a site and sort of maxing out what's actually possible in that space.
Yep. So, okay, with all of that in mind, we're now going to take a view to go, okay, we've got a good grasp on what we think the product types should start to look like. But, you know, there's houses, there's townhouses, there's apartments, that sort of thing. We're going to try and take a little bit of a deep dive into each one of those and go, can we get some rules of thumb that might help people to actually understand what their yield calculations might be? So they know, how many dwellings can I actually get out of this thing based on what I know somebody wants or needs in the area? Okay. So now, in putting some of this together, there's some minimum specs that pretty much every state actually has with regards to, I guess, the whether it be townhouse or apartment design guidelines and that sort of thing. So you're in Victoria. I think they're called the Good Apartment Design Guidelines. Is that correct?
Yeah, it might be Better Apartments or something like this. But yeah, there is a guideline which was created, and it absolutely fundamentally changed the way that apartments are now designed in Victoria.
Yeah. And that's pretty universal around the country, although the guidelines in each jurisdiction are different. So I guess we're going to talk very specifically to Victoria here, but the principles apply. And I want everyone to take this on board and go, well, what is the design guidelines in my particular jurisdiction? Because they take into account a whole bunch of things. So sunlight, circulation, all those sorts of things. What are some of the big ticket items? You said that they fundamentally changed how designs were done. What are the things that caused that to happen?
Yeah, so anyone who lives in Melbourne will know there are probably two things that you can no longer really do, and that is the sneaky bedroom with the no access to natural light, so often called the study, with a glass door smacked onto it, and those kind of borrowed light bedrooms are no longer allowed, and also the old snorkel rooms. So it used to have sort of two bedrooms offset, and one of them had a long skinny corridor to access a window on the facade to kind of allow that natural light and ventilation into that room. And a lot of those apartments, people would always be like, what do I do with this leftover space? But it was just a way to get around kind of having a narrower apartment, but still being able to fit in two bedrooms within that space, so you could kind of max out the yield. So Now it's the bedrooms, need to be on the facade. They need to be adequately designed with minimum room sizes. Living areas have minimum dimensions. Circulation within the apartment has minimum dimensions. And that's really just to enhance the livability of these spaces, because some of them were really quite shocking when you would walk into them, and they were so small that there may not have even been room to put a dining room table. So
yeah, and highly encourage anyone that's, especially if you're looking to do apartment design at any size, make sure you read those design guidelines and actually absorb them, because they're going to give you, I guess, what is the minimum standard, which may not necessarily be a saleable product and may not be something that suits your demographic. And then there's, I guess, what is probably, I'll loosely say, a more appropriate standard. And then there's, well, what is the bigger end of the size of things that might be at the more opulent end of things. So it'll give you some good guidelines around all of that, which are then going to feed into some of the rules of thumb that we're going to talk about a little bit later here. So, but I guess before we go into that part of it, one of the things that help guide us with that in trying to work out those rules of thumb, the first pass that we're going to go, is it even worth picking up the phone to Emma? Each jurisdiction will have different terminology, but what we want to work out is effectively what is the gross floor area or the habitable space of an area that goes into a site. Now, each place will do that differently. Sometimes they'll call it site coverage, and you've got to work out site coverage and number of stories. Other times they just give you a pure GFA type calculation, but we really want to work out how much livable space council will actually allow in that. So in Victoria, I guess my understanding is that there's a range of 0.5 to 0.65 that's defined in the legislation. That's percentage of site coverage. What do you find in reality when you actually take into account some of the other constraints that they put in place? So firstly, what are the constraints? And in reality, does anyone ever get that 0.65 density that they claim?
I mean, if you were looking at a site where it made sense to maximize the yield on it, then potentially you might have the full site coverage. That's probably more speaking into apartment projects, but typically speaking, in the residential projects, they might sit more around like 35 to 40% instead of like 50 or 65, just purely because you might be locked in by the lot size and then how many you can do, and then you've got the garden minimum percentage requirements for garden space, so that might be around, let's say, like 30 to 35%. And that's all permeable. And then you've got your hard landscaped areas, which fall into another percentage. So by the time you kind of take away a driveway, some garden, there's also requirements around deep planting areas forming a percentage of that as well. It is really a little bit of a struggle to see how you could kind of create such a large space, because you do sort of have to do that push and pull of making sure you've catered for the appropriate amount of landscaping.
Yeah, so we might pick up some terminology you said there. So you said permeable. So, when rain falls out of the sky and hits natural earth, the ground will actually absorb a lot of that, okay? But when you start to put some hard surfaces like a roof and concrete and all those sorts of things, water no longer soaks into the ground, instead starts to turn into sheets of water that then has to be dealt with in the stormwater system. So having enough of that permeable, so allow the water to seep in, allows, I guess, savings on how much the stormwater infrastructure has to deal with. And it also means that, look, there's actually some garden space, I guess, to deal with in the first place. So, understanding that and designing around that can create a whole bunch of constraints. Plus, there's going to be car parking requirements, where my bin enclosure is going to be, turning circles. Are there other high ticket items that are going to consume space that are not actually, I guess, the actual dwelling itself?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a driveway, for example, there's obviously going to be minimum dimensions of that. Are you putting in new crossovers? Are you having a shared driveway, or are you trying to avoid the body corporate issues associated with that and doing individual for each apartment or townhouse or whatever it is? There's kind of a number of issues, you sort of end up addressing within that before you even kind of really dig down into everything else. But even an area like, an al fresco is classed as your covered building area because it has a roof on it. So you might be thinking that's part of the outdoor space, but it's actually not. So it'll form part of that calculation as well.
Yeah, very good. So, okay, so we've got some constraints that we're sitting here. We've got some design guidelines that are going to give us some, I guess, some ideas and concepts with regards to the kind of product and the minimum sizes and that sort of thing. Let's talk about some typical rules of thumb of what some of those typical dwelling sizes might actually look like. So if we were doing townhouses, for example, I guess there's 2, 3, and 4 bedroom townhouses. So what would be a typical size that you're seeing in your area for a 2-bedroom townhouse, as an example?
I guess the 2-bedders might sit around 150 square meters. That would allow enough for the bedrooms and a range of the living spaces. So typically all of your living located on the ground floor, and then your bedrooms upstairs.
Yep. And a 3-bedder?
3-bedder around 200. So again, just a slight increase for a little bit more storage. Maybe at that point you might be looking at a double garage and similar kind of arrangement with the living spaces.
Yeah, and a 4-bedder if we were to go that far?
I think a really beautiful, generous town home, as we say, instead of like a townhouse, it starts to become. In 250 square meters, you'd usually end up with fantastic layout of 4 bedrooms with a generous master, and usually a study downstairs as well, which is definitely a popular addition and something that can kind of really add value to that home.
Yeah, so that townhome concept is something that's probably a little bit more unique in, I guess, Victoria, because I guess the rules to get a subdivision and a house design and rules to get a townhouse are so closely aligned, where you have to do design of the actual floor plan and turning circles and car parking and garden space for all of them all the way through. But you get more density out of a townhouse type project. So we tend to see more house-looking product going through a townhouse process in Victoria, whereas everywhere else, they seem to be a little bit more, well, a townhouse is one product and a house is a different product, but you guys have kind of munched them together a little bit, hence the townhome concept.
Yeah.
Now, whichever one of those designs actually sit there, we talked about, I guess the physical size, but there's ground floor and second story. Rule of thumb, how much of that ground floor would consume that space? So we're talking 50 or 60%, typically 60% for the ground floor out of that?
Yeah, maybe kind of like a 60-40 split, due to a number of things, probably res code setbacks forcing you to potentially push and pull your upper floor a little bit. But yeah, generally speaking, your living areas and your garage will take up majority of the bulk of those kind of spaces on the lower floors, and then you've just got to cater for your bedrooms upstairs, which are usually fairly easy to work out because you kind of know what the box shape or size of each rough bedroom will be, and some circulation space, and you can kind of go from there.
Yeah, so if we put a real world example there, so if we did a 3-bedroom townhouse that's 200 square meters and 60% on ground floor, that's going to give us roughly about 120 square meters of footprint that's actually going to sit on that ground floor. So now we've got, I guess, the rectangle space from a yield analysis. We go, well, how many of those rectangles can we fit by the time we put, I guess, the garden space and that sort of thing? And that's kind of where we're trying to get to, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah, because once you can kind of figure out, yes, that rough box of, okay, if I want a double or a single garage, that's X, then I've got, the area around that, the upper floor, and you could kind of copy paste them or do a really rough kind of napkin sketch of your site and really start to create a picture of, right, if these are all sort of aligning, they've potentially got shared party walls between them, how many can you fit, how do they sort of mirror around, and how many can you generally fit on your site?
Yeah, so we might do that as a rule of thumb and kind of map that out. If we want to try and formalize that, engage with someone like yourself, typically that different terminology in different states, a massing diagram or a yield analysis is really just placing those rectangles on site and going, well, based on all of the constraints with the car parking, the permeable space, the garden space, the bin enclosures, and trying to fit these rectangles. We're not trying to go, where's the bedroom, where's the bathroom? We're just going to go, how many rectangles can I fit?
Yeah, that's pretty much, I'll add another term just for fun, but envelope study. So, it's pretty much how that beginning process would go. Absolutely. I've definitely had clients sort of just send me a site and be like, what do you think? Like before they're sort of looking to buy it. And you can very quickly kind of just mass up, those rectangles that I'm talking about, dump it onto there and be like, look, not saying 100% this is how it would be, but from my initial calculations, this is what appears to fit on your site. If you're happy with that, then it looks like it could be a winner that stacks up and you'd be able to proceed.
Yeah, so a simple, and might be oversimplifying it, but let's just say you've got 1,000 square meters and you need 35% of garden space. Then now you've only got do the math, 65% left. Then how much of that is going to be driveway? You subtract a little bit more, and then you go, well, how much space is actually left? How many rectangles can I fit?
Yeah, and of course the obvious constraints of like a front, side, rear boundary, setback, and whatever. And then once you kind of can cite that, you can effectively just use 3 different coloured highlighters if you want to, and sort of draw it on there and be like green for garden, like red for building, and blue for the sort of hard landscaping. And you wouldn't be too far wrong, honestly, on your calculations, if that's how you sort of approached it.
Yeah, very good. And obviously, and we're caving it really hard here because this is really just the wet finger estimate to go how many. So you can do I guess your initial feasibility. Once you go, well, what's the raw product, I guess, selling for? What's the finished product selling for? How many of them I've actually got? Am I within range of profitability here? And if I'm within range of profitability, that's when we pick up the phone and go, hey, Emma, Can you prove to me that I'm actually right here?
Yeah, I mean, I even whilst I'm in that kind of exercise, we'll sort of chat with someone about like, what's your budget, or even prior to engaging someone like myself, you probably have a rough figure in mind, and you might also have sort of a profit figure in mind. And from that, I've got a few builders I work with, and they know particular areas well, depending on where the development is. They also know rough ballpark square meterage rates for where we're kind of sitting at with construction, whether it's low, mid, or high level of finish. And then you can just go, okay, if I had 3 at 25 square meters each, 75 square meters times, let's say 3,000 a square, and then how much is that going to be for my rough build cost? Always, the bigger picture is the overall construction cost is going to be more because you've got architect fees, council fees, consultants, landscaping, anything that's kind of excluded from that. But even on a concept design, when you get to that phase, you can kind of...
Don't forget taxes.
Oh, yeah. One of those.
Yeah, don't get me on a rant, but I calculated between direct and indirect taxes. There's about 40 different taxes that apply to a development site. So if we want to make housing affordability, folks, for anyone out there in the government, get rid of taxes and housing affordability comes back to the masses.
Yeah.
That said, okay, we've got a concept here on how to work out the yield from a townhouse perspective. Let's step it up a notch for those of us with delusions of grandeur and wanting to start to go into the apartment world and high-rise Harry, that sort of thing. So let's or the next Tim Gurner, who I don't know, we could be anyone. But how do we start? Because slightly different process from an apartment perspective, because we're not scaling out, we're scaling up. And every time we scale up, we've also got to scale down in order to get basement car parking, that sort of thing. So when we start to look at that, maybe we go back to what are the typical apartment sizes? What's a typical 2-bedroom apartment from a physical size perspective?
I mean, a typical 2-bed might sit around 70 square meters.
Yep. And a 3-bedder?
Probably anywhere between 90 and 120.
Okay, so we've got some, I guess, again, our rectangles that are actually sitting here. Now, when we come to an apartment, they're slightly different from a concept perspective because we're stacking them side by side, plus we're going vertical. So we're going to look at this from a floor plate perspective. So how many boxes can we fit on a floor plate? Mm-hmm. And then how many floor plates can we actually get in order to actually go up?
Yeah.
So from a floor plate perspective, there's a lot of things that we need to consider when we're doing apartments. So there's lifts, there's stairs, there's services, bin chutes. What are some of the other things that we need to account for that are not the actual apartment?
In terms of costing, I mean, of course, you'd have facade depending on how you kind of want to approach that as well. But yeah, I mean, look, if you have parking requirements and you're going to be excavating a basement, that's always a very big ticket item to try and sort of create an entire basement space. Digging down is always going to cost you money. It can kind of add time onto the project as well. Sometimes that might be even phased or staged separately, different permits and things like that. But realistically, you're always going to kind of know those immediate takeaways from your gross floor area versus your NSA, like a net saleable area at the end of the day. So yeah, you'll know roughly based on the number of apartments, how many lifts, what your rough stair core size might be. And you can kind of just, again, box those out as a little bit of a diagram. There's going to be a corridor and some circulation space attached to that. On your ground floors, you might be having things like amenities, whether there's like a gym or some resident amenity. There might also be storage cages. You've got all of your servicing requirements. There is a bunch of things that can kind of factor into that, even sort of dead zones for like mail rooms and lobbies and all of those little extra things that an apartment building has.
Yeah, so the ground floor might have one floor plate design to account for things like foyers and entrances, and you want to have this grand entrance and, like you said, the gym and those sorts of things. But then when you actually go up to, I guess, the first floor where we've actually got apartments, we start to get more into cookie cutter type floor plates, where if we can get the right design, we just kind of stick it on top and stick it on top, then all the services align and all those sorts of things start to play in.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, we've still got to account for, look, you've got a hallway between the apartments. You've got to get to and from the stairs and to and from the lifts, those sorts of things. You've got bin chutes, so there's wastage on each floor plate. So is it as simple as saying, look, we get that, I guess, this site coverage calculation will kind of, and the setbacks is going to give us what is the dimensions of the floor plate. And then once we've got the dimensions, there's a wastage element. So what would you say would be the wastage for those extra amenities that we just touched on?
I would say on a typical tower floor plate, maybe like 10 to 15% for those sort of servicing and corridor spaces.
Okay, so we've got the size of our floor plate. We subtract our wastage. We now know, I guess, what our typical apartment sizes are. And we go, well, how many of these apartments can we fit on here, knowing what our demographic is and how many people are actually wanting a 2-bedroom versus a 3-bedroom. We're going to try and, I guess, again, just build rectangles, in our mind to go, how many of these can we physically fit? And is it as simple as that to work out our floor plate?
Effectively, yeah. I mean, of course, you're going to have a delineation between the podium and the tower, just due to the way that would be set back in. And structural grid will often kind of inform a fair bit of that. But again, what you'd really sort of start with is what's your appropriate mix to service the demographic? Is it 1, 2, 3 bedders? And how are you most effectively going to split those over your floor plate so that you end up with, let's say, level 2 to 7 is typical 1 and 2 bedders, and then level 8 to 10 is maybe like your more premium 3 bedders if they have access to, higher amenity or a view, or they're more high value because they're up on your upper floors. So honestly, it would be the way I would typically kind of do a yield study on this would be multiple locations for the core to kind of massage around what suits best, and then color-coded boxes. So, 3 different colors for each mix, and kind of just plugging and playing until you get something that really works.
Yeah, just from a terminology perspective, you mentioned core. So what is that for, I guess, our listeners out there?
Oh, so the core will just be your major services. So your lift shafts, your fire stairs, and your general service risers. So like hydraulic, electrical, gas, which apparently we're no longer allowed in Victoria, but we'll see.
Yeah, big news, folks. I can see that trend taking on, to be honest, but I can see a few companies out there kind of fighting that as well. But
I'm quietly devastated because I love cooking on a gas cooker. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
Well, it's only the new apartments or the new places that are. You can still keep it in the old ones.
Yeah, maybe a lot more renovations on the horizon then.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so that's given us our floor plate. Then I guess there's how many floors we can actually fit, I guess, to go up. So we've got to have some height limits that might be dictated by, I guess, the council zonings. I guess, but each floor, I guess we've not just got how much, I guess, floor to ceiling, but then there's services between the ceiling space and the next floor. So, where is the air conditioning going to run? Where's the sewer, the storm, the water and all those sorts of things going to reticulate from, and the air conditioning ducts and that sort of thing. So typically, how much space do we need from floor to floor, I guess, to try and work that out?
Yeah, so I mean, in years gone by, the sort of rule of thumb, if you will, and the standard was a 3 meter floor to floor. And I think everyone just kind of kept rolling with that for a very long time until it was sort of like, well, 3050 works better. 3.1 is like a great standard if possible. Of course, depending on, we understand that if you're going up 9 floors, then that's a 900 mil extra on the building height. And, if you're going up even more, you might be sacrificing a floor for a higher floor to floor space. However, I'll tell you now from a designer's perspective, a lot of the arguments and problems we end up having in the design process are driven by not enough floor to floor being allowed for the servicing, which is pretty inflexible. There's certain things that need to fit in, like you're going to have a 150 typical concrete slab from each floor. So now you're left with 2850, and then you got 50 mil allowance for probably a ceiling, just like classic ceiling and structure to hold that up. You've got fire sprinklers, you've got lighting, exhaust ducts for kitchen. There's a lot going on in that space. So, and depending on the type of product you're trying to deliver as well, may determine the ceiling heights that you find satisfactory. And even some of these apartment design guidelines now stipulate particular apartment heights. So it's really important to kind of track some of that stuff throughout the process to make sure that you're delivering something which is not only compliant, but also speaks to the product that you're trying to make, which, having like bulkheads and ceilings and stuff going on throughout because it's been poorly planned is not going to be a great end result.
Yeah, so preferred 3.1 where humanly possible, and if that tends to impact us getting the extra floor that we want, consider a 3 meter, but have a very hard chat to Emma or your local architect to go, is this something that's really worthwhile? And then it's really, I guess, divide that by your height limits to go, well, how many floors can I actually fit here? And that will then, the floor plate, cookie cutted, will then kind of give us our yield out of that. I guess with some minor exceptions being that at certain height limits, you may have additional requirements for additional setback in order to get light and ventilation in, I guess, so that the next door neighbour doesn't get overshadowed. So you may have different levels. You might have 3 or 4 at one floor plate, and then your floor plate changes dimensions. So you've got to start to think about, what those setbacks are, but it's really just rinse and repeat the process. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, overshadowing is always going to be a big one, and trying to sort of capture some of those shadow studies early on to figure out what the impact is of your building size and shape, which you never really know until you kind of plug it in 3D. But and it's just trying to maintain the amenity of the area so you don't get 1,000,001 objections when you come later down the line. So the more kind of compliant you are, whilst also, pushing the kind of creative limits and constraints of your site, the better.
Yeah. So look, that's given us how many dwellings we can actually fit. But now we've got a problem, right? As we're starting to go up, we're now needing to have some car parking. So we need to start to go down. So we need to start to factor in, well, how many car parks do I actually need? And how many will physically fit on the site? And there's going to be some basic, let's just say, laws of physics that basically say a super skinny site, folks, means that by the time you do a ramp down, do a turning circle and another ramp down, sometimes the site is too skinny that you need to burrow to the center of the earth in order to actually get the car parking. So you want, I guess, a nice wide site in order to maximize that. But typically, if we're building a basement, can we use all of our site in most instances to actually build our basement, considering we're going to be putting, I guess, landscaping on top of that?
Correct. I mean, you can't have any intrusions of the basement into any deep planting zones, obviously, because that would defeat the purpose of sort of being able to create that deep planting. So there would be some sort of setback portions of it. You wouldn't be able to max yield 100% build to boundary the site. But yeah, I mean, where possible, let's say on the side boundaries, you might sort of pile and build to the very edges, and then you'd sort of figure out your deep planting areas around that. But typically speaking, you can take up quite a lot of space with the car park.
Yeah. So if we use the rule of thumb of build to boundary as our thing, in order to do that, there'd be, I guess, pylons that actually go at the boundary so that next door doesn't fall into our property and all those sorts of things. But we go back to something you mentioned right at the very start, dial before you dig. A lot of people may not even know that term, but it's what is underneath the ground before you actually dig up what's underneath the ground. So if there's a stormwater pipe going through the middle of your or a sewer pipe going through the middle of your car park, what you don't want is to be driving through your but and suddenly have a sewer thing just go through your windscreen, for example. So we need to take into consideration those elements. But assuming that we can navigate around that, it's then how many car parks can we physically fit in that space, in that, and so council will dictate some rules to say, look, if you've got a 1-bedroom apartment, it's X amount of car parks. A 2-bedroom, it's Y. 3-bedroom will be Z plus some visitor car parking allowances. So now that we know how many apartments we've got going up, we can calculate how many car parks we need. Then it's how many can we fit and how deep do we need to go to make it happen. So based on the site coverage being how much space we've got available, we can't use all of that space, can we? There's going to be some space down in the basement we need to consider for ramps. What other things? I think you said storage. What are the other things that you might be putting in that basement space?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the scale of apartment building, but there could be a whole bunch of things down there, from storage cages to your actual car parks, the structural grid. You'll probably end up with some dead corners, because you've got the cars this way and that way. So you're going to have some zones where you might try and place your stairs for egress or some of that servicing or storage cages there. Of course, your core will follow through and come all the way down. Car park ramp, as mentioned. And I guess you've also just got some kind of minimum dimensions of car parking spaces and circulation aisles, which, if you can get your hands on it, the Australian standard, which is AS 2890, that is the car parking rules for off-street parking, just a fancy word for basement.
2890.6 from memory.
That's the most recent one, yes. So yeah, they're always point something and you just never know, but yeah.
Yeah, so makes good light reading at night when you can't get to sleep and that sort of thing. But really good for giving real world examples of how to do different kinds of car parking configurations. So what are the common car parking configurations you start to see?
And I mean, obviously we know the true value of car parks as well can sometimes really increase the value of an apartment. So if you can ever find an extra one that you'd be able to on-sell, it's a gold mine. So it is really worth investing time in kind of doing a functional layout down there. But a classic, generous, typical car space would be 2.6 by 5.4. That's, of course, pending you actually having the room for that. You can also have shorter ones, which are 4.9, but those things then start to have an impact on the aisle size. So if you want to bore yourself and go through that standard, you can kind of dig deep into that. But typically speaking, you would kind of try and do banks of 3 spaces. So you'll end up with 2.6 by 3, which is 7.8 meters. And then obviously you've got structural grid kind of sitting outside of that. So you can really start to kind of quickly plot out, yet again, a little sketch of what might be feasible within your basement space.
Yeah, we're just having a little bit of microphone problems with you, Emma, so you might need to lean in a little bit closer.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay. But I caught the gist of the majority of that. So just sanity checking that. So about 7.8 meters wide and somewhere between 4.9 and 5.4 meters deep would give you roughly 3 car parks.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you obviously, that's just the cars themselves. Then you've got, I've got to get to that. So what you're calling the aisles. So if probably 3 meters wide for one-way traffic and 6 meters wide for another for I guess two-way traffic, and would be the minimum. And then if we, I guess, want to have a little bit, if somebody wants to drive the Hummer down there, we might want to widen that up a little bit. But by the time we calculate all of that to get in and out of that car park, we're roughly consuming about 65 square meters to give us three car parks. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you'll certainly want to be engaging a traffic engineer to really help you with some of those turning circles and swings and everything. And as you say, you never really know what's going down in a basement. Maybe there's a bin room and you've got to get like a small rubbish truck down there or something. So it certainly is worth having a proper look at what you can fit. And it's kind of one of those just because you can doesn't mean you should sort of scenarios where
absolutely can't stress that enough. Yeah, but that's basically, if we use that 65-ish square meters, we can go right with, by the time we do some wastage for I guess our ramps, by the time we do some wastage for our services, maybe where our bin enclosures are going to be, maybe some storage that we might want to be giving people, we subtract all of those from our site coverage, and that'll then divide that by 65 will give us how many car parks we can actually get. That is then going to determine, well, do I need one basement or two basements, or maybe 1.5? Like where could we potentially do a 1.5?
Yeah, I mean, I will say a small caveat. I've never personally done it off an area calculation. I always just jump in there and kind of draw them out because I just find mentally that works the best for me. But absolutely, I mean, if you live in a CBD, you've potentially driven up one of those very frustrating round and round and round kind of car parks looking for a spot and probably missing your dinner reservations. So they're kind of like a half-stepped basement. And that can be a really good solution to try and not dig down as deep, because obviously excavating is one of the most expensive things you can do in a development. So if you can look at a 1.5, that might even be if you're hitting water tables or something else. But structural engineer, traffic, etc., are going to be the best people to help kind of drive that design. And having a really good architect who can even offer you some of those solutions to your problems as well.
Yeah. So I think we've got some fairly good rules of thumb to go, well, what is plausible? And I'm not going to say what is possible. I want to say what is plausible.
Yeah.
That will then hopefully help us to actually qualify, look, are we in the right order of magnitude from a density, from a cost, from a, I guess is it meeting the demographic, all those sorts of things? What would be the next step? So I've done this at home and kind of worked that out. And next steps from there, engage someone like yourself and do a formal massing diagram.
Yeah, I think on the smaller developments, if you're someone who has a fair bit of experience in that and you're kind of churning these out quite often, you really can probably do that due diligence piece yourself and then just come to a designer when you're ready to get the plans drawn up. But yeah, for something like an apartment development, you kind of need more eyes on it, and it is a little bit more of a collaborative process to really start talking to people, whether that be council, the authorities, a planner, an architect, and probably investing a little bit more money and time into doing a really proper feasibility study for what you're trying to achieve and seeing if it stacks up.
Very good. So that's a fairly good wrap up on all of that. Would there be any parting words of wisdom that you'd give anyone out there, I guess, before engaging this process?
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be do your research. That's what everyone always says online, do your research. But yeah, just have a keen eye and a keen interest in what's going on around you. What are some of the precedents in the area? Don't forget that you can always go onto the council websites or even call them and request full packages of drawings from other buildings. And that can be extremely helpful in having a look at literal full apartment layouts, complete decks of drawings, how they've done their basement. And if it's just a couple of doors up or down, or maybe even your next door neighbor, that could really start to inform how you kind of approach your design or learn some lessons from what you might interpret as mistakes that they've made. So I think always having the kind of big picture and always trying to keep the dream alive from my perspective in terms of creating a really unique and high quality product that's well designed, but also on budget, so that you can actually really make a profit. Because of course, if you're a developer, that's what you're here for. It's creating a good reputation and a good profit on your product.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you very much for that, Emma. So now, for anyone else out there, I guess not only do we run these Sunday sessions, but we also run regular networking sessions all the way around the country. So where we have industry experts just like Emma and a whole bunch more. So civil engineers, town planners, architects, accountants, and a whole bunch more. Plus, we have people in the community sharing real deals. So if you are interested in coming to one of those events, click on the link below, so developernetwork.com.au/events. We run those both physically and also we live stream them all the way around the country. So would love to see you guys at one of those at the upcoming event. Emma, it has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much for your time today. And I look forward to with you at our very next Melbourne meetup. So
I'll be there, yes, just in a couple of days. So looking forward to it.
Until then, folks, bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.